Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the October edition of the Power BI Dev Camp. This month, we'll be discussing our second part of our series in the modern React JS development with App Owns Data Embedding. I'm going to pass it over to our Dev Camp counselor, Ted Pattison. Ted, take it away.
That is Ted. I'm sorry about that.
All set. Ted, how's it going today?
It's going well, thanks. I had my sound there. I apologize for that. I have to figure out how to turn that on. And were you getting the double?
Yeah, I think if you right-click at the top of the tab, you should be able to mute the tab.
Okay, yeah. Well, I was over in the other, not Chrome, but over in Edge, so it was a little bit confusing to me. Anyway, no problem. Let's go ahead and get started here. So, what we're going to talk about today, is working with React. Now, this is part 2 of a longer saga. So last month in August, we covered, React.js, how to kind of move from the old to the new way of programming. And we covered user owns data embedding. So this time we're going to look at the other style of embedding, which is app owns data embedding. Now, with this session right here, what we're going to cover is a new sample application that I have added to the the particular App Owns Data Starter Kit. Now, with this particular application, it's something that demonstrates App Owns Data embedding. So you need more than just a client application. Now, this is something I originally published last summer in July of 2021, but I just updated it for this session with this new React client. So that's what we're going to focus on today, is this App Owns Data React client. And so I built this with React.js, with Material UI. We're using the Microsoft Authentication Library, the latest components, TypeScript, and Webpack. And so, while the App Owns Data Starter Kit has many different pieces, this is the piece that we're going to focus on. So I thought I'd just kind of start with a demo of all this. Daniel, can you confirm that my voice and my video image is coming across without a problem?
Yeah, Ted, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, super. So here is kind of this new React client application. Now, let's say we start with a login. And the idea, is once this user is able to log into the system, the application is able to connect with this middle tier, this custom web API. It's then able to call back and get information about a customer tenant. So if we just take a quick, test drive through here, we have a left nav that allows you to click and get to reports. Notice that the left nav, is collapsible if you want more space here. We can also see that we're kind of using a custom menu bar, so this is not built into the report, but this is something that I created with Material UI, such that I can do things like, get rid of the navigation menu, add it back. If I want to have the filter pane showing, if I want to have the bookmarks pane, we're just kind of giving the user the similar kind of control that they have. One extra piece right here is, let's go down to here. And note that in the Power BI service, you can switch between the different view modes. So I want to kind of demonstrate, how your application, can do the same thing, going between these different view modes and do things, such as, go into full screen mode, so that the user can see the entire report. Okay, now, one of the things that I did when I just extended the App Owns Data Starter Kit was, in addition to, dealing with the embedded report, which is a standard Power BI report, we've also added paginated reports. So when the App Owns Data Starter Kit creates a new customer tenant, creates the workspace, adds the sales report and sales data set like before, but now it also uses an RDL template file to upload a paginated report, which is connected, dynamically to the same data set inside here. Okay, now you've seen those. And so, what I also want to do is, let's go back here and note that, I can navigate from one page to another. That's great. if the user is given enough permission, the user can also, go into a particular page in edit mode. Let's go ahead and make a change here. And with this particular change, we'll go to columns. We'll change it to a particular hideous color. And notice that we can now go ahead and do a save. And if I move off that report and I move back to the report, you can see that those changes, were saved back to Power BI. Okay, let's just kind of test two more things. Let's go ahead and I have a report, and so maybe the user is going to come down here, and do something such as, let's set a filter, so we just want California for this report. Great. Now that we've done that, I can go into edit mode. We're going to say save as, and now, we'll have a separate report. So the user can just simply clone reports inside there, and kind of the experience is after, the user clones a report, it should be added to the left nav. It should now be embedded not as a new report, but an existing report. And then finally, you can edit and do save as on existing reports, but there's also a data sets section. So if I click on a data set, it is going to create a copy of a new report. Let's say we just kind of want a, grand total of sales revenue inside here. So let's go ahead and add that. Not doing much with this report, but just kind of wanted to show kind of the save as. And, so now this is going to be a, the big number report. We go ahead, we hit save inside here. And so now you're kind of seeing, the different pieces of functionality, that we're able to get, by moving around in this client. Okay, so now that we've done that, that first look, let's go back to the slides for a second. And, now back at the slides, we're going to go on a quick review of what we covered last session. And when I say quick, there's a lot of content here that if you've, spent time looking through the last session or, studied modern React in other ways, that's going to be necessary. So I'm not going to take that much time on this section. But I'm going to kind of point out the things that if you don't know, you need to go learn. Same thing with section 2. We're going to talk about the App Owns Data Starter Kit and the other pieces, just enough to how you see it fits in, but we want to spend most of our time in sections 3, 4, and onward. Okay, now things that you're supposed to know before this session already starts, is migrating from classic React to modern React. And that's kind of what we covered in the August session. And the main idea is that when React was introduced, and we used it with modern versions of JavaScript and TypeScript, we would create our React components as classes that inherited from another class, and we would have lifecycle methods. And what occurred is that the creators of React, from feedback they got, came to the conclusion that this was maybe over-engineered and too difficult. And allowed for easy bugs to be introduced. So they've kind of done an about face. And this happened about 2 years ago, where they, changed the page and said, from here on, when you create React components, the best practice is just to create a function. Create a functional component, not a class-based component. And they added this concept of hooks. And the idea of a hook is that it gives you some way to kind of interact with the React framework to store state, or to make an API call after the DOM changes have been applied, things like that. So it's just a very different style. Now, when we program with a new style of React, you should be familiar with hooks. So if you're not already familiar with them, you're going to be seeing them in this session, but you should get up to speed on, what they're for. So use state is for storing state behind your component. Use effect is for, generally running code, after the React changes to the DOM have been applied, inside the browser and so on. Now, another thing that we're going to use in this session that we introduced in the previous session was working with Material UI. So if you're using React and you're using the modern version, Material UI is a great complement because instead of working with divs and spans and UL, unordered lists, you work with these high-level objects, box, button, paper, typography. And so what you'll see is that this application has been created, using Material UI. Here's an example of creating a UI with a heading with typography and a table container, all the different things. And if you look at something like, this user interface right here, this was Material UI that, gives you a fairly easy and good looking approach, to build something as complicated, as a menu item. Okay, now, one last thing that we covered last session is how we build, user authentication into single page applications using Microsoft's latest and greatest. So they have something which is the Microsoft Authentication Library.js for the browser. The one we're using here, you can kind of see on the slide there, it's at Azure MSAL browser. Some people call that V2, but there's some docs there. And then the one extra piece on top of this library is another component library that Microsoft made for React. And it's modern, it uses hooks. So for instance, if you look at a lot of the code in the application I'm going to show and look at the React components, they'll do things like they'll use the use is authenticated hook so that when they render, they can say, is the user authenticated, yes or no? So it's easy to render, one set of HTML if the user is authenticated and another set, if the user is not. Now, if that blazingly flash review session was blazingly fast, I would encourage you to watch last month and the modern React JS development with Power BI embedding. So this takes a lot more time to kind of cover those topics. Now, the other thing we want to cover before getting into the meat of this application is, what is the App Owns Data Starter Kit? Now, the App Owns Data Starter Kit was something that I created last summer, and it gives a general architecture for App Owns Data embedding. So the first thing to see, is that we need our own custom database. We're just using an Azure SQL database instance for this. And as our application creates a multi-tenant environment, they're going to create workspaces for tenants. We got to track users and permissions, so we need a database to track that information. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create an admin application, aptly named App Owns Data Admin. Now, for those of you who have never seen the App Owns Data Starter Kit before, let's go back and just kind of test drive this application. So the idea is that the company that's kind of doing the embedding and hosting customers, to come into their customer tenants, has something where they can see customer tenants. So let's go up here and we're going to create a new tenant, Wingtip Toys, and we'll point it to a particular database. And the idea is that when I click on this, it's now running this code that creates a workspace, associates the workspace with a dedicated capacity. It then is going to upload a PBX file to create the sales data set. And, once this gets created inside here, note that I can come back and view, and I can see, inside here, we have two different reports. We have a data set, so this is all the things, that have been created. Also note that this code with the updates that were just made this last month now uses service principal profiles. So the original version did not have that. So there is code that every time we create a new customer tenant, the service principal creates a new service principal profile. And then it's the profile that executes code to create the workspace and do all the work inside there. So that's something to look for. Also note that we also have the ability to kind of control the users right here. And so if I go into edit mode, you can see that you can take a user and point them. So for my next demo, I'm going to take this user and put this user back to an unassigned state to start. But also another new feature is that, we have this activity log right here. And you can kind of see that now we're kind of tracking, what tenant, who is the user, what do we do, a view report, a create report. Now we're also tracking page changes, so we can see this user started on homepage and then went kind of page by page through here. So once again, there's an activity log that we use to track, this different activity. Now with that, let's go back to these slides. So I'm not really going to cover the app owns data admin application in more detail, but what you can see in the big picture, it's important because it's the thing that we use to provision the customer tenants. Now, the part we're more focused on in this session, is consumption. How do we get these embedded reports, in front of the users of the application? So we start by creating a middle tier web API. And the idea is that now we're going to hook up client applications. And the idea is the client application calls into the web API. The web API has to then query the database to figure out what permissions this user has. Then it's able to call to the Power BI REST API and generate an embed token and other various data needed for embedding, and that gets passed back to the client tier. So what we're focused on today is not this app owns data client. That's the original one. And I did that in a fairly straightforward jQuery and JavaScript implementation. So now I kind of wanted to put, more of a, kind of a leading edge proof of concept sample, that people might use as a starting point. We see a lot of customers using React and, almost as much using Angular, but those seem to be the two popular things that people are using today, to build their client front ends. Now, you can also see that the App Owns Data Starter Kit has a database behind it. If I go back to, the tenant admin, you can see that the pages here kind of correspond directly, to these database tables. But as you kind of look and learn more about the App Owns Data Starter Kit, this table schema is one of the areas where some customers want to extend what we've provided here because they want more flexibility or granularity, in how they track things like user permissions. Now, we have the App Owns Data React client. I keep talking about how we're going to get to that and talk a lot about it. And now here's kind of when we're going to start. So it makes calls to the App Owns Data web API. And what's important about the App Owns Data architecture is you can use any identity provider that you want. Any implementation, you have to pick one. You can't stay fluffy and say, hey, I still want to choose. So for this sample, I've chosen, Azure AD, creating, an Azure AD application to authenticate the user. But if you wanted to use OAuth, Auth0 or Ping, you can use those. But the idea is that that client application will make a call to the web API, and the web API, then has to consult with the database, to see things like inventory or what permissions. And then also note that when it talks to the Power BI REST API, it does it as a service principal. And kind of the short story is when the user calls in, the web API is able to kind of do a user lookup to find out what is the tenant. It can then look at the tenant and figure out what the profile ID is. So when it then calls to the workspace, it's able to call, under the service principal profile ID. Okay, now we have web controllers. Now, let's say that we go back here, and here is the web API, and you have these controllers right here. So these are kind of your entry points. And so we have a user login, and that's when a user first, authenticates in a session. We just basically send a call to the back end so we can say that the user last logged in at this particular time. Now, the embed controller is important. We're going to take a deeper look at that because that returns the data that we need for embedding. We also want to be able to refresh just the embed token. So there's another entry point just to get the embed token and its related metadata back. We have an activity log, and that's where the client SPA makes a web API call to log activity and put it into the database. And then this one's new with this version. We also have an export to file. So in the client application, I want the user to be able to export a report on demand And so we need an entry point in our web API to support that. Now, let's kind of start with, we have this React client right here. And let's say that we go back here. And now let's also open up our friend Fiddler. And now let's go ahead, and I'm just going to do a refresh, which is just going to kind of simulate the application, starting up and initializing. And as we do that, let's go back to, that's the wrong one. Okay, one more time. Okay, so now you can see that this user, hasn't been assigned to a tenant. So let's do this. Let's go back to this user. And you kind of saw when I took this user and I assigned that user to no tenant. So now we'll take that user and assign it to the tenant we just created, Wingtip Toys. Okay, so now, as we go back, and you can see that before I was assigned to a tenant, what happened? And if I come back here and we kind of take a look at that, you can see that the data model came back with nothing in it. So ultimately it says there's nothing there for this particular user. Okay, so now we'll do a second, and all of a sudden, what you'll see is that now the API sees that this user, is attached, to a particular tenant. And now we bring back lots of things, including the embed token. And, also I want to provide a list of reports, so we basically include a list of reports, in the data model. Okay, so you can see what the web API does. When the client says, I need to start a session, it basically figures out what tenant, from a architectural standpoint, is what workspace to look at. And then it's able to, get the metadata. Now, once again, there's a lot of code that is not part of the React client. And in particular, what you'll see is that there's a lot of code that's in the web API, in the Power BI service API section inside there. And what you'll see, when we get an embed token, I'm just going to tease you by kind of showing you quickly, but not taking the time to drill through this. You can kind of see that it figures out who the user is. Are you in a tenant? If you are in a tenant, now we need to get the workspace ID, because that's the workspace we're going to look at. We also need to start executing code under the profile ID. Okay, so like I said, this is just a teaser. This is not a session where we're going to drill down, on the web API. I just kind of wanted to point out that it would be good for you to kind of go look at that code and kind of see how it kind of deals with setting up the calling context, so that we can get things like the embed data and pass it back to our user. But what you'll see is that this data comes back, and we got the data sets and we got the reports. Okay, so now we're at the end of the second part, which I kind of refer to it as a review session. And what I wanted to do is, if you want more drill down on the App Owns Data Admin and the App Owns Data Web API, the new versions of the code are there, but there's also this session from last summer, that will look at more detail. So now, without further delay, let's go ahead and kind of start drilling, into this React application. Now, let's say that I go into Visual Studio, and here is the React application. What you can see at a top level is it has an app folder. And what's outside of the app folder is all fairly simple. And what's going to happen is that this project, has a dependency on NPM, Node Package Manager, which is installed with Node.js. And the idea is that every time, that we rebuild this right here, we should be able to kind of see evidence that it's running Webpack. And if you're curious about, the Webpack configuration, or the TS config configuration, you can look at these things here, but the idea is that everything inside this app folder, when we run Webpack, it's going to take everything inside there and build it into a single output file, bundle.js. So this is the thing that actually gets, pushed out. It's not supposed to be human readable. It's supposed to be, what Webpack puts inside there. But at the end of the day, what you'll see is that you have the app folder that all gets compiled into one JS file. And then you have a very simple application, that basically just says, start up the back end, which is the www root folder, and just kind of adds support, for single page applications. Okay. So once again, everything gets pushed in www root. Now, I just kind of talked about how it gets built. So now let's kind of look at the structure of this application. What we can see here is that we have an app. We have some high level things like the index.tsx file is the top level. Then we have the app.tx file. Okay, now let's go back to the slide. So there is the app folder. Inside the app folder, is where you have app.tsx and app context and app or auth config. We're going to look at those. Also note that all the calls to the API, are made through a utility class, which is called app owns data web API. So we're going to take a look at that, but then in the components folder, there's where we have all our TSX files, for TypeScript, JSX. And so we have pages. And what you'll see is that in the pages folder is where we have the actual pages, that are targets of the router, home, profile, and report. And then there's a report folder that has a couple components, report path and report toolbar, that we use on the report component itself. Now, let's kind of start with, the API wrapper class. So, if I take a look at this code, this is the utility code that allows other things to call out. Now, while I'm in development, what I can do is I can switch things. So if I start up the web API and I start up this SPA at the same time, I want to talk to the web API through localhost 44302. Once you have the API out in production, you can just basically run right against that. But you'll kind of see that, we have code to get an access token. And the idea is, and maybe I'll just go back to the slide, that we have code that tries to get the token from cache. So MSAL maintains a token cache. And if it can find a token in there, it's able to get it. And so if there's not a token that's available locally, well, then we call acquire token pop-up. And that will generally cause the user to interact and sign in, but now I can get, a access token when I need it. And typically once you get it, that can be used for the next hour. And quite often, the refreshing strategy will, keep going, beyond that and, allow you to, keep the session alive for as long as you need. Now, next thing we want to do is we want to call, get embedding data. And so the first thing I do is I kind of look at the data, as it comes back. Once again, if you kind of take a look at this data, or if you kind of look at the, raw view inside here, what we're going to do, is we're going to create TypeScript types, such that I can now create a method. And notice that my get embedding data, it's an asynchronous method. So it returns a promise, but what's the return type? View model. So this is just a really easy way to basically make a web service API call in TypeScript. And when the response comes back as JSON, just to quickly wrap it into a strongly typed result. Okay, now that we have that, let's kind of look at the application. So once again, to put this into context right here, we need some place to store state that the whole application needs. And so that's why we've created this app context. And the idea with app context is you get to kind of define a set of data, and you don't need to use this idea of context if you just need to pass state from one component to another. But when you have state that needs to be passed to just about every component, and it's a real pain, to go from the grandparent to the parent and pass parameters, and then go from the parent to the child and pass the same parameters, and then on to the grandchild. So the idea of context just makes it so that you can just have a set of content that's available everywhere. So we define what our content is. And then you can also see that, using hooks, there is a hook, for creating context. Now, if we look at app.tx, there's where we kind of use the context. So when I look at the application, app.tsx, first thing is that just because you create a context doesn't mean it's going to store the state. We still need to store the state for that context in one of our components. So the app makes a lot of sense. So the first thing we do is we create a bunch of state properties, using use state. Okay. Second, we're going to have a use effect call. And the idea of use effect, let's go back here, into my app. And the idea of use effect is that, after React has seen what changes to the DOM need to be made and committed those changes, it then executes use effect. So use effect, gets to be the right place to make API calls inside here. So what you can see is that, after this, HTML is committed to the browser, we're going to run this right here. And it runs while you're not authenticated. So you need to check, am I authenticated? If so, run it. And then later, when it finally switches to being authenticated, this is the trigger that makes use effect run again. So anytime use authenticated, is flipped, this will run. And then finally, you can kind of see that we've got this context, and then you create an app context provider. And then what is the value? And here, what you can see is that we're just kind of mapping our app context, back to this state right here. And, that's what allows me to make a context that's shared. The one other thing I want to point out is that in almost every case, when you create context, you want to share state. But if you don't just want to share state with a child component, you want that child component to actually take an action to modify the state, then you have to pass setter methods. So here's a method that we're going to pass in our context so that, child components, can actually do something with that context. Okay. Now, we also need to refresh embedding data along the way at various times. So for instance, when the application starts up, it's able to get the embedding data, which includes the different reports. So what happens when you create a new report? The embedding data is no longer valid. So there's going to be times where we have to call refresh embedding data, during the lifetime of the application. And it simply gets the embedding data and resets the reports. Okay. Now you've seen that, and you've seen the provider tag. Let's say that I want to use context in a child component. And what you'll see, is it's incredibly easy. So up there at the top of your file, you're going to import use context, from React, so we get that hook. We're also going to import that context from the app context.tsx file. But then once you've done that, what you can see is, when it's time to use it, we just say use context. And then here I include, whatever data I want to be made available. And then it's just easy to consume. And what's kind of neat is that if you create context in the app, and then you have a child component and a grandchild component that doesn't do anything with app context, but you have a great grandchild, that great grandchild component could just tap into context like this and be able to read the data from the context and also to be able to call the setter methods. Okay, now what we're going to do now is we're going to look at designing the functional component that is report.tsx. And just to kind of let's go back here. to this page, and let's go here and click on this right here, because now, what you'll see is that we get the report, and the report comes up. Notice that we also are trapping the URL. So let me go ahead and copy that. Now, let's go back here. And, the idea is that people can bookmark, this /reports/grid for report, and get back to this report. So the things there that, we need to know to make all this work is that most of the code we're going to look at is in report TSX. So report TSX, has to deal with the routing, to parse the parameters and get the ID of the report. Or as you'll see, it could be the ID of a data set from the URL. The report is also going to acquire embed tokens. So notice that in this case, I'm not getting the embed tokens, inside of the app context, because we have to refresh embed tokens more often. So I think it's separate data. So, report.tsx is going to have the storage, for embed tokens, and also the code to kind of manage token lifetime. Now, it's going to use the Power BI JavaScript API, to embed the reports. And then also report uses several child components. So there's a report path that acts like a breadcrumb. It has the tenant and then the report name. There's the report toolbar that you've already seen as things, that have the different menus on it. And so that kind of complements the report. Now, let's talk about, how routing works. So what you'll see is that you have to start routing at some particular place. And so if I go back here and we take a look at components, there are pages, but you'll also see up top here, we have page layout, and here's where we kind of have the router. And so the router is, we have the home element, we have the profile, and we have page not found, but here's reports ID. And so the idea is that the path is going to go to reports / and then you're going to have some value that I want to recognize, as ID. And if that's the case, we're going to call the report component. Now, once again, let's focus on the URL. Now, if I define a report route or a page route that looks like this, what I'm able to do is then get the parameter called ID, because I've kind of defined the route as everything that's after report / is going to be the ID parameter. And then what you'll find is using that gets to be pretty simple. We're going to say import and use params. And then when I call use params, I just use, object deconstruction to basically say, all I really want is the ID parameter. And now your code is going to be able to kind of see, what's passed after report and make sure it is a GUID. Okay, all good so far. Now, when we look at reports.tsx, it's a component that is going to manage the state for the embed token. So we're going to manage the embed token itself. It's a big string. The embed token expiration, which is passed back to me, by the Power BI REST API along with the embed token. There's just a flag that I have. Has the embed token been acquired? Yes or no? And then there's something that I have a little bit for a demo wow, which is the embed token expiration display. And we're going to see how that fits in. Also, whenever report.tsx actually embeds a report and calls Power BI embed, and it gets that report object, it's going to save it, into embedded report. And that's basically so that the toolbar has an opportunity, to see that report object and program against it. Now, there was also some code to get the embed token. So we are going to use our convenience class app owns data web API, which has a get embed token. And the idea is that this will get the embed token. Note that when I look back here and we look at models, notice that we have an embed token result. So there's two things I want. I want the string, which is the embed token. I also want the expiration because that's going to allow me to figure out, how much time I have before that expires. Now, if we go back over here, let's go ahead and clear this out. And I'm going to go ahead and do a refresh right here. And what we see here is the call to the embed token. So what you can see here is when I call embed token, it's able to give me the embed token. It's also able to give me the expiration as well. Okay, so covering a lot of stuff so far, but now let's look at this initialization logic. Now, if we look at use effect, behind report.tsx, well, I want to see that the embed token has been acquired. If so, we're going to call, what's down below, but I guess what I'm pointing out here is as this code runs, the first time it runs, we won't have the embed token, so we'll call get embed token. And the idea is that if I go back to the previous slide and we call get embed token, what happens is we call across the network, to get the embed token. Sorry for my drawing. And then the next thing that we do is we say set embed token, which basically forces, the use effect method to fire again. I can see, anytime, we switch the, the embed token, we're going to run this, but anyway, once the embed token is acquired, what this code does is it simply looks at the ID. It looks through the reports and sees if it finds a match to the ID. If it finds a match to the ID, it then says, is it a Power BI report or a paginated report? If it's a Power BI report, we have one method, embed existing report. If it's a paginated report, it's another. Now, if the GUID doesn't match a report, maybe it's a data set. So once again, if I go back to this application, what you'll see here is that it finds this match and it finds, that is a Power BI report. It finds this match, and it finds out it's a paginated report. And if I put a data set, we're not seeing data sets in the demo quite yet, but it would basically match that inside there. So there's basically 3 different routing points. Now, because of limited time that we have here, I also kind of want to point you to something that I think you should kind of take a longer look at. And that is if we go down to pages and report, what you can see is that, here is embed existing report, embedding paginated report, and embed new report, and you'll see that there's quite a bit of code, behind each one, so I don't want to kind of go through all that because it would take too long, but I would definitely, encourage you to kind of digest what's in these, because that's what actually does the embedding. Now, if we look at the output for this report, I had to create some kind of coordination between the report TSX file and the report toolbar TSX file. And just to kind of show, what is the crux of this issue. If I go to this report, you can see that the embedded report is being shown by report.tsx. Yet this up above, is not report TSX. This is report toolbar.tsx. And so for code behind the toolbar to be able to kind of control, getting to the Power BI report, we have to kind of pass some state inside there. The other thing that I found is that when you take a report and you set something like the view mode to one of these settings right here, you can't go back to the report and do a get method to figure out what setting, it is. So the way I figured out how to do that, was basically we're going to start tracking state for a report. And so we have view mode, which is, fit to page, but can be one of 3 things. We have, are you in edit mode? True or false? Do you want to show navigation? Do you want to show filter pane? So the idea here is that, as a report opens, we're tracking whether the navigation menu is showing or not behind the scenes, And, because of that, we track this set of properties in the report, where we do, we execute the code to embed the report, but then you have the report toolbar. So what we need to do, and this, gets to be a little bit messy, but we're going to basically pass, all these state parameters so that report toolbar, has equal access to them as well. So that is what kind of we use to kind of get the coordination, between these two pieces right here, the report itself and the report toolbar. Now, if you've looked at the report toolbar, I kind of gave a walkthrough before, so it does exporting of the report, and we're going to talk about that next. It has a view menu, so you can turn on or off the navigation. You can turn on or off the filter pane or the bookmarks pane, and then you have view mode. So I've already kind of demonstrated most of those except for the export menu. So now there's 3 specific topics that we want to go into. And these, the reason I put these topics here is because we see more and more of our customers that are really digging deep into Apple's data embedding, have this recurring set of questions. I guess it's not obvious, so here's some, ways to be able to deal with that. Well, first of all, let's talk about managing embed token expiration. So let's kind of start with this refresh embed token. So what's going to happen here is when we first go to the reports TSX, it's going to run this code, and use effect is what's going to fire it. So usually when use effect fires something and you get data from across the network, you have to call set something, to kind of trigger the, the component to render again. So here we get the embed token, and we set the embed token, we set the expiration. We have a display here, and you're going to see that in just a second. And then I have a special function that I'm calling, which is called monitor token expiration. Now, here's the way it's going to work. If I go back to this application and I hover over this, what we can see here is that I have something that once a second checks the expiration token, or the expiration of the embed token. Now, the reason I set it to 1 second is probably more for having it come across in a demo. So if you're doing something in production and you check it every 30 seconds or once a minute, that should be fine. But what you're going to see, and let's kind of count down here, as we hit the 2-minute mark, we have this ability to have the function say, hey, wait a second, 2 minutes is as low as I want to get, as close as to expiration. And so what's going to happen here, and I need a little participation from you, Mr. Token Expiration. When it gets to 2 minutes, let's see if this thing works. Okay, I put myself out there, 2 minutes, and what you see all of a sudden, it jumps up to 10 again. So in this demo, a couple things to point out. First thing is that when you create embed tokens, I'm going to go back here and look at app settings. Notice that you have an embed token lifetime, which is configurable. So embed tokens by default are 1 hour, but what you'll see here, and I told you I wasn't going to go through too much of this code here, but when we create embed tokens, if we don't want it to be an hour, we want it to be less, we can put that inside. So my embed tokens, are only 10 minutes. And we've just got some customers with high security, and they just wanted to cut their embed token lifetime from 60 down to 10 minutes or 15 minutes. But now if we kind of look at this code, we have this call, which is called monitor token expiration. And the idea is that it's able to kind of look at that string that was passed by Power BI along with the embed token and figure out, what time it is. And we can compare that by taking the time it is now. Now it's something that we're going to, get in milliseconds, so that we divide by 1,000. But now if we kind of look at this code right here, what you'll see is that here I'm kind of setting, the seconds for refresh to 2 minutes. You can set that to whatever you want, but the idea is we're going to call that. And if we get down below 2 minutes, we're going to call refresh embed token. And behind the scenes, that's going to refresh the embed token for us. If I also click on this button, it will do it. But what's important to see is we're not refreshing the report. So everything and the user experience, behind the scenes, will be completely transparent to the user, because all we're really doing is getting a new embed token, and then I'm going to go back one slide. Here is where we're once we get the embed token, we're going to call this in the Power BI REST API, to actually associate the token, with, either the existing report or the new report, that the user is working with. Okay. And here's one really screwy part about this. And this took me some time to work through. And let's go back to report.aspx. And notice that I don't have just one use effect, but I have two use effects. So here, notice that in use effect, we're calling set timeout. Now, at first, I tried to use set interval. So if you call window.setInterval, you can just say, fire once a second in an ongoing fashion. But the problem with use effect is it freezes the parameters that are passed. So if you use set interval, it keeps passing you, the state components that were there. And so you don't see anything changing. So in effect, we have to call monitor token expiration so that something, such as the embed token expiration display gets updated, and this forces this, to run again. But effectively, let's go back, what we really want, is something that monitors the embed token and silently refreshes it behind the scenes, when the user needs to make that happen. So hopefully the code, that I have shown here, will make, that type of implementation, something that, you can create something similar. Okay, two more topics we want to look at.
Hey, Ted, can I just chime in here for a second?
Yeah.
Just wanted to give you a heads up. We got about 10 minutes left. So I wanted to encourage everyone, if they have any questions, to either type them in on YouTube or to go to aka.ms/PowerBI DevCamp Live to ask some more detailed questions there. Thanks.
Thanks, Daniel. Okay, first section is exporting reports and giving the user the ability to do that. So let's say a user goes to a page and picks a particular type of filtering. So we want to allow the user, to go to the export menu and to export, either the current page, as PowerPoint, PNG, or PDF, or export the entire report. Now, once they, export a report, what's going to happen is our code in the client calls to the back end, to the web API, that calls to the Power BI service. Now, unfortunately, that is processed as a background job. So the fastest you can make it is about 20 seconds. But the idea is that if this starts spinning, note if the user chooses cancel, it no longer says cancel. I switch that to dismiss. It doesn't stop the job. There's just the user can go back, to the UI and start using it. But the idea is that when this ends, then there will be a download for the user, and then you can just open it up, and use it in a Word document or have it for a PowerPoint slide deck or, have a PDF to send to somebody else. Now, what we want for a rich user experience is two important things. If a user has set filtering or click slicers, that's what the user wants to export. And so there's this issue where the user sets a filter and you run an export command just to export the report, but you don't keep the filtering. So we want to make sure that, what we export is what the user sees. And we also want to give the user a choice to export just the current page or all visible report pages. Now, if you have the Power BI JavaScript report object, note down there that I can, write pretty generic code to look at the report object and just say, get the active page and give me its name. Also note that the page name is not the display name. It's kind of the ugly thing that you see in the URL at the end of the page. But the second thing is for you to do something called capture a bookmark, which basically is able just to capture all the current filtering. And that makes it very easy to kind of get what you want, because you can always have your JavaScript get the page name and get the current bookmark and send that to the back end. Now, if you look at the app owns data web API, it has an export file. There is a export file request. And here you can kind of see the code. If you look at the bottom code, here's the code behind the event handlers, such as someone goes to the export menu and chooses, export page to PDF. So what it's able to do is get the active page name, get the bookmark. It's able to put that, into the export file request. Note that is my own custom type, which the app owns data starter kit introduced. That's not a Microsoft type. And then I'm going to call export file. Now, if I look at the export file function that is inside of the app owns data web API, you can see that we get the URL. We're going to get the post data. We're going to send that, back inside there. In fact, if we go here and, let's say we go to Florida, and now what we'd like to do, is we'd like to, get the export of the current page to PNG. So over here, what you can see is that, this is what, my front end, has sent to the back end inside there. My backend then has to talk to the Power BI REST API. And while this runs right here, let me go through a couple more slides. And kind of the big picture is that you call export to file from the SPA. It then blocks while it makes a series of calls. So if you look at the Power BI REST API, there's an export to file in group, but that doesn't give you back a file. It starts a job. So you have to kind of block in response to the client calling, but then you start the job. You then have to call, get export to file status and group. And then once you see that it's ready, then you're able to call the file and return that back to the browser. And if we come back here, at the end of the day, what you'll see is that, there is the, page that has been exported for you. Okay. So, once again, exporting is a lot more pain than you think it would be. But here's a piece of good news. You kind of saw that if I have a Power BI report, I got to add a toolbar and do all this work. However, let's go to a paginated report. What you're going to see here is that I'm not even using a custom toolbar, because when we use a paginated report, it gives you the toolbar, that you need to do any type of export, including I want to export. So it just turns out that once you embed the, paginated report, you kind of get great user experience, and exporting, without having to do any work. Okay, Daniel, I know I have 2 minutes left, but I need 4. So the last topic we want to look at here, and also I can call out that I didn't really cover the export API, but we do have a dev camp session where we drill down and talk about, calling the API. So our last session is designing a self-service authoring experience. So what you'll see is that by changing the permissions, for a user, let's go back here and kind of remind me that, we've given this user, permissions to go to a tenant, but no create or edit. And so what that means is when the user goes here, the user just has kind of consuming, but no authoring capabilities. So what we'll do is we'll go and we'll switch this user, so now this user has edit permissions. And now I'm just going to go ahead and do a refresh. When I do a refresh, it gets back new embedding data. And you can see that the user can edit content but can't yet create content. So if the user is allowed to edit, what we have, is the ability to get into edit mode. And I kind of demoed this earlier, and you can make changes, and be able to save those changes. Now, one thing about this is that it's not just the user interface lighting up, and getting the user into edit mode, but also realize that when the user saves, that the embed token has to have the report ID, with read write enabled, or else this doesn't work. And so what's important to see is the Power BI or the App Owns Data Starter Kit gives back the embed token, and it's conditional on whether the user, has edit permissions to whether we're going to allow that user to save changes back to a report. Now, notice that they're saved, but not save as. And so the last part of the demo, will be to go here and give that user create capabilities. And so now let's go ahead and do one more refresh. And so the two things that we see here, is one, that this user, can go into edit mode, and can do a save or a save as. And let's go ahead and I'll call this report 2. And then as I click on this, what I want to do is let's go ahead and hit save. And so what you're going to see is it creates report 2 that automatically comes back here. And behind the scenes, what you're going to see is that we had to get new embedding data, because that report wasn't there in our original information. So getting the updated collection of reports is one thing that we have to do. The other thing we have to do is we have to get a new embed token, because when we create embed tokens, we're putting all of the report IDs in the embed token. And so after the embed token gets created, I create a new report. There's a new report ID. I need an embed token that also contains that report ID. So the callback, to get the embed token, has the web API kind of enumerating through, all the reports and data sets in the target workspace, and building the embed token, such that it can use it. Okay. So like I said, it was 2 minutes over, Dan. Thank you for accommodating, but what we kind of saw is, how edit permissions, and create permissions, give you the ability to kind of do more with this application. And, also we went through and kind of talked about when you create a new report, the embed token needs the workspace ID that's handled by the backend web API, but also we need new embedding data and a new embed token, to be able to handle that. Okay. Now, just the calls to action, App Owns Data Starter Kit, something that, you can't try out this without downloading the rest of it. If you need more about modern React, there's the August session from me, but there's also this URL, beta.reactjs.org. Go right to the source of the people that created it and see, the documentation they're writing. How about next month? Next month, we will actually have a continuation of App Owns data. So next month, the session is going to be based on authenticating users for App Owns data embedding, external users, with Azure B2C. So being able to take, users that have Google accounts and Facebook accounts and have them use those accounts and authenticate with your application, but still have them leverage your App Owns data embedding application. And then also, I wanted to call out community.powerbi.com. It's where Daniel and I live. Send us a note. Also feel free to kind of send questions, to this session. And me and other community members, we'll do our best to get answers to those questions. So with that, I guess it's back to you, Daniel.
Thanks so much, Ted. I really appreciate you, giving over your knowledge to the community. Doesn't look like we have any questions today, but I would just echo your sentiment as far as like getting involved with the community and checking out all the calls to action that you mentioned in your slides. So we'll be sure to update the YouTube description if you're watching this after the fact. But thank you very much, Ted, and thank you to the community for tuning in live, and thank you to those who are watching it after the fact, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.